Hello, and welcome to Our Own Right's very first featured author segment. I'm Mary Fridiani, the organizer of Our Own Right, and I'm here today with Dr. Mario Dell-Olio. Mario's most recent book, New Men, Bonds of Brotherhood, will be released by 5310 Publishing on December 1st. So we're here to talk about him, his style, get to know his book more. So Mario, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
A pleasure to be here. Thank you.
It's wonderful. We are very excited for all of the different topics we're going to discuss today. So New Men, Bonds of Brotherhood is your third book. Why don't you start us off telling us about the plot of this book?
Okay, so this book has been this was inspired by my time in seminary studying for priesthood, and that year I spent in Rome. So the plot of the book follows three characters who really want to go light the world on fire and change the world and serve other people, and then they get to Vatican City and discover that the real world is a little more political and less loving than they had quite imagined at 21 years old, and they find themselves falling in love and find themselves fighting with authorities and evaluating their lives. So
Sounds very exciting. Did some of these themes that these men encounter, did some of this was this inspired from your education and what you were studying at the time as well?
yeah, actually, so what I did before I started writing this book was I called up so many of my classmates from that time period, and we're talking a good number of years ago, and some of us became priests and some of us did not. Some of us left priesthood, and I left the seminary before I was ordained priest and never became a priest. But all of the stories are informed by our mutual experiences. Some of the struggles each of us had, coming from all over the country. We were all from all over the United States, and we were stationed in Vatican City. So each of these stories uh, exemplifies or tells a story of somebody's personal journey, and the three main characters are journeys of maybe 15, 20 of my classmates, so
Oh, that's cool. So it's like all of their different stories kind of woven together in this, in these couple of few
yes,
strands. Well, that's beautiful.
yeah,
Are,
yeah.
are any of your stories in there?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, some of my stories are there. I mean, like I can honestly say that one of the three main characters, the personality is definitely my personality. Not
Mhm.
everything that happens in the book is happened to me, but the character of Anthony is definitely me. I was wide-eyed and idealistic, and I just thought everything was wonderful, and I was I was very hurt by the fact that real life isn't what we imagine, and so that some of my stories are definitely in there, my struggles and my joys too. So
Mhm. Was
yeah.
it I guess how was it to reflect back on those years? Because this was a book you wrote recently, correct?
Yeah, I wrote it over the last 2 years, and so we're talking back in the 80s,
Mhm.
so it's quite a long time ago, 1982, 83. Um, and luckily for me, I'm a journaler. So I
Mhm.
have journals going all the way back through college, and I spent a lot of time reading through and thinking, "Oh my God, I was so young," and "Oh my God, I was so idealistic," and "My goodness, why couldn't I just let that go?" You know? But yes, so part of it was being patient with my younger self and forgiving my younger self for the things I had to learn along the way. some of it was just delightfully delicious, if you will.
Mhm.
Discovering a new city, living in Rome, wandering the streets, eating at the restaurants, falling in love when it was so totally unexpected.
Mhm.
So all those firsts were delicious. So reliving all of that over the last year and a half has been um, fraught with melancholy at the same time for lost dreams, but also happiness over the joy that I discovered in my real life.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. So you were living in Italy, so I'm sure some of what's in your book is from your experience while you were there. Did you have to do any additional research or side research to kind of fill in some of those gaps?
it's very interesting. I did not have to do a lot of research on this book. It's I knew Rome so well. I know Rome and the Vatican so well because even since 1983, I have returned there many times over. And so I know the city. Strangely enough, I always go back to the same restaurants whenever I visit. So, and they are still there. That's
Wow.
the staying power. And then, of course, having taught theology for, well, decades now,
Mhm.
uh, you know, I knew what the church taught and where it disagreed with what I believed or what they lived in the book. And so, I had all of that at my fingertips and in my mind. So, strangely, my other books, I did have to do more research than this one. This one seemed to flow. The most research I did was really interviewing my classmates,
Mhm.
um, matching memories and filling in the blanks. So, yeah.
Awesome. So this is your third book, yes? You
Yes.
mentioned having to do research for some of your other books. What's some research that you've had to do? Maybe your most interesting or most niche topic you've had to research for a book.
So, my first book, which is called Coming About Life in the Balance, was a memoir. And it'd be strange, sounds strange to think that I had to do research on my own memoir, but I actually did because it's a sailing adventure that went wrong. It was a story about my husband and I um, leaving the United States and sailing across to St. Thomas, Virgin Islands, and nearly losing our lives. And the research I had to do was really sailing research, technical research, because
Yeah.
although I am a sailor, I am not a professional, so I had to do a
Yeah.
lot of
Yep.
that kind of research. Um, and then I guess we'll talk about it later, but I did a lot more research on the book I'm querying now.
Mhm.
So because it's nonfiction and I had to, and it's historical in nature, so
Mm,
I have to do a
yes.
lot more research. So
You didn't quite live those pages.
exactly, exactly.
um, so I have a little bit of just information that you sent ahead of time. Most notably, that you mentioned that you're an ethics teacher, but you also are a doctor of sacred music, and you also have a master of music in vocal performance. So music is very much a factor in your life, both in your education and your time now, as you're also a chair of the music department. Um, what what came first for you, music or writing, and how do they play together in your world?
So definitely music came first. Music came well before. Uh, I found myself singing and loving it and without any training, as is typical of sometimes private or independent schools. You get hired to teach something and then you find yourself being the head of a club and then that develops into something else. And so my first teaching job directly out of seminary was teaching theology, and they needed music for, you know, for everything. And so I found myself leading the folk group back then, playing my guitar and singing along. And then I started a choir, and because I had been singing in choirs forever, I just used my natural instincts. And I was not trained as a conductor or director. So I actually went back to school and got my master's in music and in vocal performance because, I was always, I was a tenor soloist, and so I took that and ran with it, and I've started I think 3 or 4 music programs at different schools. So I love my music. And music is just part of me. Like when anything is happening, there's always like a soundtrack in my head. So, like whatever I'm experiencing, I kind of figured I kind of hear this music accompanying me along on the journey. So, and in fact, on my first book, there's in New York City, the Empire City Men's Chorus is doing a full concert performance experience on my book coming about, and that's premiering on this week, and it's actually a documentary with music they sung, music themed, and I do readings from it. So it's really quite exciting.
Incredible.
Yeah. So that soundtrack is there. Uh, Um, but like all through this, like some of my characters, like the character in um, in my book, um, Body and Soul, which was my second book, that follows somebody who is a college age kid throughout his adulthood, and he's a musician, and so my characters have music in them, and definitely Anthony in this. The book, The New Man, is a musician. So there's always going to be a musical element in my stories. It can't help but be because it's so much a part of me.
Yeah.
Um, but I came to writing very late, very, very late. I I had this story about the boat tragedy accident in my head for uh, nearly 18, 19 years, and I needed to write it down. And it wasn't until after I got my doctorate and I had to write hundreds of pages for a dissertation that I was like, oh, I, I guess I can write. Some outside validation.
Yeah.
Somebody thought I was good enough to write, and literally, because before that, I just felt that writing was too daunting a task, to write hundreds of pages. Being an academic, I've been writing for my entire life, but to write, 300 pages seemed way too daunting and something I didn't want to do. And
And it's on
um,
your own time, your own schedule. No one's gonna make sure you're gonna get it done. Yeah,
exactly,
it's a lot.
exactly.
It's a lot more work and more pressure in that regard.
Right. But I found that writing these stories, I love it. I'm so glad that I have this new vocation in my life, and it's only 3, 4 years old. So
Hmm.
uh,
Do you do you play music while you're drafting, or are you a silent office kind of guy?
I play music. I
Mhm.
definitely play music. It can't have words to it though.
Yeah.
The words distract me. Uh,
Yeah.
I have to have, it has to be instrumental, generally classical or new age style music, something that sort of soothes and can fade into the background, and that kind of gets my synapses firing.
Hmm. So you just mentioned, you said you've been writing for about 3 years, your own work.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and I believe you mentioned earlier that your newest book was about a year and a half of writing.
Yes. Yes. Shall I show it?
Yes, yes, please do. Oh, right, you have a
This is-
copy. Yes,
yeah.
that looks fantastic.
And I'm very, very pleased with the designers at and the editor at 5310 Publishing. And I was a little nervous about the cover because it's a little bit more risque than is my style, but um, but I love it. It's beautiful.
Mhm.
And yeah, you know, it's interesting the process I took with this. I I'm a pantser, I think they call it. Like I let the story unfold.
Yep.
And I had a sense of what I wanted to do with it. And I suppose the research I did, like you asked earlier, was calling my classmates and getting stories for them from them. But in the process, I wove those stories together and created characters that are a composite of all of us, you know. And the fact that it is fiction allowed me to, play with the storyline, Uh,
Mhm.
oh, this would be very dramatic if this happened. Oh, I should have, like so I could go into the direction that, strayed from fact and but still kept the spirit of the story.
Mhm.
So I really do believe that the spirit of the stories and the journeys that each of these characters take is truth. It may not be fact, but it's truth. So.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, so you work, obviously you have full-time work, and so you write on the side, and you write with music, with classical music, and you're a pantser. What else about your writing process can you share with us, and how challenging or maybe easy is it to balance work and writing and everything else?
Okay. So thank you. That's a great question for me. Since I'm a full-time teacher, and have been since I was 23 or 22, I think. And so it's a long time of teaching. And so over the summers is when I really I write the body or the bulk of my books. And so like I will sit and I'm very, very disciplined with regard to that. I'll have my morning coffee and perhaps do my yoga in the morning. And then once I'm focused, I will sit for several hours in the morning and just write. And I won't force myself to just sit there. I get up, walk around, go outside, look
Mhm.
at the garden,
Yep.
pull a couple of weeds, but um, my most productive time is in the morning. It's when I'm fresh. And though I say I'm disciplined, it sounds like I'm forcing myself to do it. It's not at all that way at all. It's a real joy. And so by the time lunchtime rolls around, I have other chores to do. And oftentimes, like when I'm out in the garden, I'm a big gardener, mowing the lawn, pulling weeds. Uh, the story's still active in my mind, and um, different plot lines come to fruition during those tasks, during my downtime, if you will.
Mhm.
And so,
Yep.
yeah, I am definitely a writer during vacation time, during summer
Mhm.
vacation. But then, you know, as most writers know, it doesn't take just one draft, I mean,
If only it only took one draft.
if only, right? But like by August I'll have my draft, but it's throughout the rest of the year that on the weekends, the Saturday mornings and Sunday mornings, where I will sit and actually edit and flesh out the skeleton of the writing that I do. And I'm one of those people who uh, I don't overwrite on the first draft. I'm definitely one who gets the story down on the page and then needs to put flesh on the bones,
Mhm.
uh, add the details, add the dialogue, um, you know, search for the perfect word, you
Yep.
know. Um, in I never believe in trying to find that perfect word or phrase on the first draft. I mean, I don't want to stop the creative flow. I want to just get it down on the page.
Mhm.
And because you can always go back and make it pretty, but if you stop the flow, sometimes you can't remember where you were going.
Yep.
So,
And if you stop to try and find every perfect word, now it's going to take, that much longer to write the full thing because
right.
perfect words don't always exist.
Exactly. Exactly. So, yeah.
And so this newest book of yours um, is being published by 5310 Publishing. Yes, but your first two you self-published, correct?
That's right.
What what have been I guess the highs and lows of self-publishing versus traditional publishing? What works for you? What doesn't work? Um, the joys, tell us a little bit about that experience.
Well, I'd say, for self-publishing, especially my first book coming about, uh, I wanted to get that story out there, and I was so new to the whole process. The thing about self-publishing is that you can get it out there very quickly. Once you've written it, once you've edited and proofed it, and I'm not a professional graphic designer, but I was able to use my own photography on the cover, and I designed it. And I love the creative process. So for a self-publisher, it's all in your hands, and it's really exciting to be able to do all of that. Um, and the mirror of that is that it's all in your hands. You're responsible for everything.
Yep.
So, so it is a lot of work, and I have to be quite honest with you that the marketing is the most difficult part of it. Um, but having said that, even if you go the traditional route, the author has to be a partner with the publisher, and oftentimes they require that. You have to partner with them in marketing. You can't just put it in their hands and expect it to take off. I mean, we have to be our own best salespeople. And the marketing I find the most daunting of tasks. So. Um, but I think self-publishing has its place, and um, for a lot of us, self-publishing is not just the way we start, but is the way we write. And I think we just have to find the best way for us, and that's an individual choice. And it doesn't mean that just because you self-publish that you can't traditionally publish, and vice versa. I don't know where my future books will go, right? I
Oh
mean
yeah.
that's out there, and and I'm so new to traditional publishing, and I have to say that 5310 publishing has been a an amazing experience for me. Um, Incredible individual attention that I've gotten, very detailed work on the editing process, how many rounds of that, and which brings me to something that I think that everybody must do, especially if you're going to self-publish. You have to get another set of eyes to look at your work. We don't catch our own, and having been a teacher and being a teacher, I tell this to my students all the time. We don't catch our own errors all the time, and no software is going to catch all our errors. Spell
Nope.
check, Grammarly, and Pro Writing Aid, they're great, but they're not enough. You need another set of human eyes to really examine it all. So I'm really happy with the editor and the team at 53 Publishing.
What made you go with a traditional publishing route this time around?
So this is another really great question. Thank you. I think it just was always a dream, and I think because this book, The New Men, Bonds of Brotherhood, there's a strong message here that I want to get out there. It's a little bit more controversial. It does deal with some of the hypocrisy of the church with regard to sexuality and the whole gay issue within the church. Um, the book does deal with some of the abuse the scandal of the Catholic Church because it was very much a part of the experience of a number of the different classmates and our stories. So um, I really wanted it to get out there to a larger audience, and I thought that perhaps traditional publishing might offer me that opportunity.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm hoping that it does because I do have, I believe in the message, of finding your way
Mhm.
in spite of some of the challenges that we face.
I agree. It's an important message for as many people to hear as possible. I think we need to hear that message more these days. Absolutely. Yes. So yes, like we had mentioned before, New Men Bonds of Brotherhood comes out December 1, which is in like 2 weeks, just under 2 weeks, I think, which is
Yes.
very exciting. Um, we will have an excerpt along with this interview available. If somebody watches this and is really excited and doesn't want to wait for their copy to come in, they can read a small excerpt as well. I have read it and it's very good, and I'm very excited.
Oh, thank
Um,
you. Thank you.
yes, it lives up to the hype. It lives up to the expectation. Absolutely. Um, yeah, so you have that. I don't want to say coming to an end because it's just being released, and in some ways it's just starting. But as far as your role in the writing process, that writing has come to an end. What are you working on something next? What's next for you as a writer?
Okay, so I'm very excited about my next project. I'm querying it now. I wrote a book, a narrative nonfiction, based on my parents' love story. And my parents, born and raised in tiny towns in southern Italy, both born. My father was born in 1926, my mother in 1931, and so. My father died about 10 years ago, and in going through his stuff, my mother found a whole stack of letters that she had written to him many years ago, and she didn't know he had kept them. So the book is called, or the working title is called Letters from Italy. And it's framed by letters they wrote to each other. They had not met. This is like the precursor to Match.com or whatever. They had never met, and they wrote for 2 years. My mother in Italy, my father in New York City, and then they finally met, and they fell in love through their words. What a, it's not a better story for a writer to write about people
I was gonna
falling
say
in love with their.
you were born to be a writer with that kind of history. Absolutely.
Right, that's right. So what I did was over the period of 3 years, I took my iPhone and the letters, and I sat with my mom, who just turned 89 years old on November 1st. And I sat with her. She read the letters to me in Italian, and I do speak Italian, but I had to transcribe them into English. And as she would read, she would go off on tangents and describe what she was thinking at that time and what the background was. And I got so many stories that I had never heard before. So the book Letters from Italy is based on their love story, and with all the ups and downs of being immigrants, and seeking a better life, and goes through World War II and New York in the 60s. And so I'm very excited about that, and I'm querying that now, which takes forever. I've been sending that out for now, like I guess no, it's not quite 6 months. Feels like 6 months. I started in September, so it's not quite 3 months. But so that's next. Um, and then, to be honest with you, I'm toying with the idea of writing a sequel to the New Men Bonds of Brotherhood. What happens to these characters after seminary?
Mhm.
So I'm still toying with that idea. I'm not sure if I want to write a sequel or a standalone book which deals with finding love during the time of AIDS, which
Mhm.
really was the 80s and 90s, and or finding love in despite the epidemic, something
Mhm.
hopeful in the midst of
Yes.
something tragic. Yeah.
Yes. Sounds sounds like you have a very full writing schedule. Do you write are you working on multiple manuscripts at the same time, or are you a focus on one until it's done and move on to the next?
Well, I thought I was a focus on one until I started writing both New Men and Letters from Italy, and I was doing them concomitantly. And I would find when I would get stuck on one, I would move to the other. And I
Mhm.
found because they were so diametrically different from each other that it was easy to switch gears. Because if I was
Yep.
frustrated and couldn't move forward, I could go to something completely different,
Mhm.
and it really did help. Um, but then, like in the midst of all of that, I was inspired by a Broadway show that I went to see, and I love puppies. I love dogs in the background. But I was inspired by a Broadway show that came out in 2019 called The Inheritance, which was based on um, gay men living through the AIDS crisis and the inheritance of this other generation of younger people. Um, and so I, you know, I just after I read that, I was so moved and so inspired that I began writing the first chapter of the next book. So, and that's been sitting there. It's been sitting there for probably about 9 months because I've had a few other things on my to-do list. Uh, but um, but it's there. So I guess for me, when I have an idea, I have to write it down, or even if I'm working on
Mhm.
something else at the moment.
Yep. That's wonderful. To your point about switching to one manuscript versus the other because they are so different in their nature. It reminds me a little bit of what you were saying about gardening, and it's a different type of art, and the other manuscript is still kind of simmering in the back of your mind, and you're just kind of letting it percolate because the answers are there. But sometimes if you just stare at a wall for like too long, you hit a wall, you need to try and go around it, to get to the other side.
Exactly. And I think that's part of the creative process. I really do. I think sometimes we need to give time for the thoughts and the ideas to develop, to grow, to blossom, and if it's just like when you're trying to think of a word, and it's at the tip of your tongue, the
Yep.
harder you work at it, the more it eludes you. And if you
Mm-hmm.
start to do
Mm-hmm.
something else, there it just comes, so I think that's kind of my creative process anyway.
Yeah, I think it's a good one. Um, we have time, it looks like, for about one final question. Um, so, it's kind of a broad question. What advice would you give someone who's working on their first book? It could be practical, it could be artistic.
I think that one of the things that has been most helpful to me is that um, I just wrote, and I didn't try to start at the beginning and then go in order. When I would sit down, and this is my recommendation, sit down and write what is in your head. If you have something going on in your head and there's this scene in your head, write that scene down. You don't have to write the part that gets to that scene. You're going to lose
Mm-hmm.
that scene if you don't write it right now. So write exactly what's in your head and let that flow until that piece is exhausted. Uh, and then you can go back at any time with, you know, we can reorganize our paragraphs, we can reorganize our story in chapters after the fact, but write what's in your head. And for me, that is what has really prevented me from having writer's block. I never forced myself to do uh, something that wasn't in my head at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So, and don't necessarily write in order. You know, you can do all of that later. So that's my first piece of advice. My second piece of advice is once it's done, or the first draft is done, is get it proofed, get other people to look at it. Um, you know, don't get your feelings hurt if somebody can't follow your storyline. Um, that's telling you something you can use for your writing. It's telling you that perhaps you have to approach it from a different angle, or you have to give more detail, or something that's in your head wasn't necessarily explained as thoroughly as a reader who's not in your head
Yes.
needs to
Yep.
have it explained. So, and then always, always proof, always proof. And then my third piece of advice, because I always do things in threes, uh, is don't let rejection stop you. Don't let rejection from a publisher or an agent or a family member or a friend stop you from writing if writing is your passion. If you have something to say, you must say it. Keeping that inside would be such a disservice to your heart, to your soul, to
Mhm.
the passion of writing. So just keep writing no matter what.
Yes. Amen. Keeping it in will hurt more than the rejection will over time. Absolutely. Yes.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much again for joining us today. This was super fun and super informative. I'm very excited for New Men Bonds of Brotherhood to come out in just about 2 weeks. I know I'm not the only one who is anxious and ready for it to come out. You also being one of those people.
Yes.
Yes, yes, it's a long time coming, and it's going to be it's fantastic. So thank you again for the time and for your patience with the dog barking at a squirrel in the kitchen. Um, that's her mortal enemy these days. But yes, thank you, and
I can relate.
yes, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Mary. This was a real pleasure. Thank you for giving me the opportunity, and thank you to Own Right.
Absolutely.